At Christmas, my family found out I had $8 million and said I owed it to my brother, who's always been the favorite. I'm Ellie, 37, and I spent my life being compared to my younger brother Jason. Jason was always the golden child, the athlete, the charmer, the one our parents bragged about. Meanwhile, I quietly worked hard, building a small marketing agency that eventually landed big clients and lucrative contracts. By 37, I had $8 million saved between my business and investments, living modestly so no one knew. That changed during Christmas, when my mom snooped through a folder left open on my laptop and saw a financial statement. Suddenly, my parents and Jason were demanding I help him out of his debt, saying he deserved it more because of all the struggles he'd had. The holiday turned ugly fast, and I decided I'd had enough. I walked away from the guilt, the manipulation, and their demands, finally putting myself first. My name is Ellie, and I'm 37 years old. I'm not really the kind of person who usually puts my personal life out there for strangers to read or watch, but for some reason, I feel like it's time to share this. Maybe it's because I've carried these memories alone for so long, or maybe it's because I know there are people out there who have felt invisible in their own families too. Either way, here I am, telling my story, not for sympathy, but because sometimes saying it out loud is the only way to finally breathe again. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And I'd really love it if you could drop a comment with your location and what time it is where you are. It always amazes me to see how far these stories reach. From as far back as I can remember, it was always about Jason, my younger brother, my parents' pride and joy. Jason was born 3 years after me, and it felt like from the moment he came into the world, the spotlight that I'd barely had a glimpse of flickered out entirely. He was the star of every show, the golden boy, the athlete, the kid with charm who could walk into a room and have everyone's attention within seconds. And I was the quiet one. The kid who didn't cause trouble, who kept her head down, who did everything she could to make life easier for everyone else. I think I was 5 when I first realized how different things were. I'd drawn a picture at preschool. It wasn't anything amazing, just stick figures of our family with a sun in the corner and maybe some clouds. But I was proud of it. I remember tugging at my mom's sleeve, holding it up for her to see. She glanced at it for half a second and said, "That's nice, Ellie," before going right back to fussing over Jason, who was maybe 2 at the time and had just spilled juice on himself. That was a small thing, but I felt it. That dismissal. That reminder that I wasn't the one who mattered most. It was like that all through childhood. Every award I brought home from school, every certificate for perfect attendance, every spelling bee ribbon, I'd hold them up, hopeful, waiting for that spark of pride in their eyes. And every time, it was met with a polite smile, a distracted "good job, honey," as their attention shifted back to Jason's soccer practice, Jason's science fair, Jason's birthday party that somehow needed a bigger cake than mine ever did. Jason was good at everything he tried, or at least that's how my parents told the story. The truth was, he was decent at sports, he was friendly, and he had this easy way about him that made people want to root for him. And my parents adored him for it. When he scored a single goal in a game, it was a reason to celebrate at our favorite pizza place. When he made the school play, just in the chorus, they sent emails to every relative, inviting them to come watch. When he scraped through a math test with AC, they congratulated him on his hard work. Meanwhile, I was getting straight A's, staying up late to study, volunteering at the library, and no one seemed to notice. I remember one summer, when I was about 10, I'd entered this statewide reading competition, and I'd won. I'd read more books than any other kid my age in the entire state. I was so excited. The school held a little ceremony, gave me a medal, even wrote about it in the local paper. My teacher called my parents to tell them how proud they should be. And you know what? They didn't come to the ceremony. They said they couldn't make it because Jason had baseball practice. Later that evening, when I came home with the medal around my neck, they barely looked up from the dinner table. I started to learn not to expect anything. That's probably the saddest part. I stopped showing them my awards. I stopped telling them when I did something well. I stopped hoping they'd notice when I stayed up all night studying, or when I helped clean the house without being asked. I figured if I didn't expect praise, I wouldn't be disappointed when it didn't come. Jason, on the other hand, could do no wrong. Even when he did. I remember once in high school, he got caught cheating on a history test. The teacher called my parents in. I thought maybe, just maybe, this would be the moment they'd stop putting him on a pedestal. But no. They left that meeting telling Jason they understood he was under pressure, that everyone makes mistakes, and that they were proud of how honest he'd been after getting caught. Meanwhile, when I came home with a B+ in calculus, they asked if I was getting distracted by friends or boys. I wasn't. I didn't have many friends. It was hard to, growing up in Jason's shadow. I wasn't jealous of him, not really. It was more that I felt invisible. Like no matter what I did, I'd never be enough to earn the kind of love they gave him so freely. I kept my head down, I worked hard, and I tried not to let it show how much it hurt. By the time I was in college, I'd stopped coming home much. I went to a university a few hours away and threw myself into my studies. I worked part-time jobs, I applied for every scholarship I could, and I started building the life I wanted. A life where I didn't have to compete for scraps of attention. I majored in marketing, graduated near the top of my class, and started my own agency. It was small at first, just me, working out of my apartment, taking on small clients and building up my portfolio. But I loved it. I loved the independence, the challenge, the chance to prove to myself that I could succeed without needing anyone else's approval. And I did succeed. Slowly, quietly, I started landing bigger clients. I reinvested everything I earned. I made smart choices. I learned about investing, about scaling a business, about making money work for me instead of the other way around. By the time I was 37, I had $8 million between my business assets, savings, and investments. I didn't live like someone with that kind of money. I still drove the same sensible car, lived in a modest condo, wore the same kind of clothes I always had. I didn't see the point of flashing wealth when it wasn't what I was after. What I wanted was security, independence, peace. Jason, meanwhile, hadn't changed much. He bounced from job to job, always with some new plan or excuse. He racked up debt, made bad choices, and every time he stumbled, my parents were there to catch him, bail him out, make excuses. And through it all, I kept my distance. I visited on holidays, sent polite messages on birthdays, and focused on my own life. That brings me to last Christmas, the moment everything shifted. The moment when the quiet life I'd built for myself collided with the family I thought I'd finally learned to keep at arm's length. I hadn't planned on staying long. Just a day or two to be polite, exchange gifts, and head home before the tension got too thick. I brought my laptop with me because I had a client deadline looming, and on Christmas Eve, I was up late finishing some reports. I must have left a folder open on the screen when I stepped away. I didn't think anything of it. I trusted that my family wouldn't go snooping. I should have known better. I came back into the room to find my mom at the table, staring at the screen. Her eyes were wide, her face pale, like she'd just uncovered some terrible secret. But it wasn't a secret. It was just my life, laid out in numbers she'd never bothered to ask about. She pointed at the screen, her voice sharp. Is this real? Do you actually have all this money? And just like that, the years of invisibility vanished. But not in the way I'd always dreamed of. Not because they were finally proud of me. No. It was because they saw something they wanted. And what followed was a Christmas I'll never forget. The accusations, the guilt trips, the demands that I helped Jason with his debts because he deserved it more. But that's a story for another part of this journey. After high school, I knew I had a choice to make. I could keep chasing the approval of people who would never give it, or I could focus on building a life that didn't depend on it. I chose the latter. It wasn't an overnight decision. It came after years of disappointment, of watching my efforts go unnoticed while Jason's smallest achievements were celebrated like he'd cured cancer or won an Olympic medal. I remember sitting on the edge of my bed the summer before college, staring at my acceptance letter, and realizing that this was my chance. My chance to break free, even if just a little, and create something of my own. I went to college a few hours away, close enough that I could come home if I needed to, but far enough that I could start carving out my own space in the world. I chose marketing not because it was flashy or because anyone pushed me toward it, but because it combined everything I was good at: strategy, creativity, understanding people. And maybe, deep down, because I knew I'd have to learn how to sell myself if I ever wanted to be seen. College wasn't easy. I didn't have the luxury of coasting. I worked part-time jobs between classes, campus bookstore, coffee shops, even freelance writing gigs online, anything to help pay tuition and living expenses, so I wouldn't have to ask my parents for help. Asking them for anything always came with strings, with reminders of how much more they were doing for Jason, and I didn't want to give them that power over me. I became an expert at budgeting, at stretching $20 into groceries for a week, at finding used textbooks and free software. It was exhausting, but it was mine. Every small victory felt hard-earned because it was. Graduation came with no fanfare for my family. Jason had just lost another job, and my parents' attention was completely on him. I didn't even mind at that point. I'd stopped expecting anything. I walked across that stage, knowing that while no one in the audience was clapping for me the way they had for Jason's high school graduation, I was clapping for myself. And that mattered more. After college, I didn't waste time. I'd interned with a small agency my senior year, and I took that experience, combined it with the contacts I'd made, and launched my own marketing business. It wasn't glamorous. I didn't have investors or a fancy office space. I worked out of my tiny apartment, using a secondhand desk and a laptop that had seen better days. My first clients were small businesses, mom-and-pop shops, local service providers, people who couldn't afford a big agency, but needed help getting their name out there. I charged just enough to pay the bills and started building my reputation. I didn't sleep much in those early years. I'd spend my days meeting with clients, designing campaigns, writing copy, building websites, managing social media accounts. Nights were for invoicing, bookkeeping, researching trends, teaching myself new skills. I taught myself graphic design because I couldn't afford to hire anyone. I learned coding basics so I could build better websites. I watched hours of tutorials, read books, signed up for free webinars, anything that would help me grow. There were weeks when I wondered if I'd made a huge mistake. When I skipped meals to make rent. When I cried out of sheer exhaustion. But I kept going because every small win reminded me that I was building something no one could take credit for except me. Meanwhile, Jason was drifting. Every time I called home, the story was the same. Jason had lost another job, Jason was trying a new business idea that had fallen through, Jason had gotten into some new kind of debt. My parents' voices were always filled with worry, but also with excuses. He's under a lot of pressure, they'd say. It's just a rough patch. That rough patch lasted for years. He'd come up with grand plans, opening a bar, starting a clothing line, launching an app, and each one fell apart. And each time, my parents stepped in to bail him out, remortgaging the house, draining retirement accounts, doing whatever they could to keep him afloat. I stayed out of it. I kept my head down and focused on my work. I never offered advice because I knew it wouldn't be welcomed, and honestly, I was too tired from building my own path to get tangled up in Jason's mess. When I visited for holidays, I'd hear about how hard he was trying, how things were about to turn around for him. And I'd sit there listening, biting my tongue, knowing that no one ever asked how my business was doing, how I was managing. That was fine. I didn't need their approval. I'd stopped needing it long ago. As my business grew, I started landing bigger clients. It was never a sudden overnight success, just a steady climb, a client telling a colleague who told a friend who needed help. I focused on delivering good work, on being reliable, on doing what I said I'd do. Word spread. I went from small local businesses to regional chains, then national brands. I brought on freelancers to help with overflow work when I could afford to. I saved aggressively. Every dollar that didn't go to basic living expenses went back into the business or into investments. I wasn't interested in flashy cars or luxury vacations. I wanted stability, security, the kind of life where I wouldn't have to worry about what would happen if things went wrong. By the time I was 37, I had built a company that consistently brought in solid revenue. I'd saved and invested wisely, spread out my money so it wasn't all tied to one thing. I had $8 million between my business assets, savings, and investments. But if you looked at me, you wouldn't have guessed it. I still lived in the same modest condo I'd bought years earlier. I still drove my reliable car, wore the same practical clothes, shopped at the same stores. It wasn't about showing off. I didn't see the point. I wasn't trying to prove anything to anyone anymore. My parents and Jason had no idea. They still thought of me as the quiet one who worked too hard, who probably wasn't doing all that well, but wouldn't admit it. I let them think that because it kept the peace. Because I knew if they saw the reality, they'd find a way to make it about Jason, to twist it into something I owed him or them. So I kept my head down, just like I always had, and focused on living the life I'd built for myself. Every once in a while, I'd get the urge to share my successes with them, to show them how far I'd come, how hard I'd worked. But I always stopped myself. I knew it wouldn't matter. They wouldn't be proud in the way I wanted. They'd be resentful, or they'd see it as a resource for Jason, or they'd downplay it somehow. So I kept it to myself. My friends knew, my mentors knew, my clients knew, but my family? They didn't. And that felt safer. I thought I could keep it that way forever. I thought I could keep my world separate, the life I'd built and the family that never saw me for who I was. But all it took was one holiday, one moment of carelessness, for that wall to come crashing down. And when it did, everything I'd worked so hard to protect was suddenly at risk. But that's a story for another day. For now, all you need to know is that I built my own path, not to prove anything to them, but to prove it to myself. And I did it. Quietly, steadily, without applause, but I did it. Last Christmas was supposed to be like every other Christmas. I went through the motions as I always did, telling myself I was doing it for the tradition, for the sense of normalcy, even if it felt hollow. I packed up my car with a few carefully wrapped gifts, nothing extravagant, because I knew better than to bring anything that might be seen as showing off, and made the drive to my parents' house. The same house where I'd grown up, the same place where I'd spent years feeling invisible, where every creak of the floorboards seemed to echo with old memories of being overlooked. I pulled into the driveway, and for a moment I just sat there behind the wheel, looking at the familiar sight. The worn shutters, the faded wreath on the door, the sagging gutters my dad always swore he'd fix next spring. It was comforting in a way that nothing had changed. And yet, deep down, I think I'd hoped maybe something would be different this year. Maybe this would be the year they'd ask how I was doing. Really ask. But I knew better. Inside, it smelled of pine and cinnamon, the usual artificial scents of candles trying to cover up the faint mustiness of an old house. The tree was in its usual spot, overloaded with ornaments collected over decades, some of them falling apart, held together with glue or tape. My parents were in the kitchen, arguing in that quiet, familiar way they did, about how long to cook the ham. Jason wasn't there yet, though his presents were already under the tree, piled higher than anyone else's as always. I did my best to settle in. I made small talk, helped set the table, try to blend in like I always did. I was good at that. It was like slipping into an old coat, uncomfortable, but familiar. Later, when things calmed down, I pulled out my laptop at the dining table. A client had emailed me with a minor emergency, and I'd promised to check on it. Just a few minutes, I thought. No one ever paid attention to what I was doing anyway. But then, for once, someone did. I don't even remember what distracted me. Maybe Jason arrived, maybe my dad called me to help with something. It's a blur now. All I know is that I left my laptop open, a folder still up on the screen. I hadn't thought twice about it. It wasn't like I had anything shocking on there, just work files, spreadsheets, reports. The kind of stuff no one in my family had ever cared about. But this time, my mom noticed. When I came back into the room, she was sitting at the table, her face pale, staring at the screen like she'd seen a ghost. My heart sank. I knew that look. It was the look she'd give when something didn't fit into the world she understood, when something challenged the narrative she'd built around who I was. "What's this?" she asked, her voice tight, pointing at the screen. I froze. My eyes flicked to the laptop. The folder was open to a financial summary I'd been preparing for a meeting after the holidays. I'd been finalizing end-of-year numbers for my company. There it was in black and white. Contracts, revenue, assets. The line that caught her eye must have been the total, over $8 million in combined business assets, investments, and savings. I felt my stomach twist. "It's just work stuff, Mom," I said quickly, trying to close the laptop. But it was too late. $8 million? She said, her voice rising. "Ellie, what is this? Is this real?" Jason came in then, hearing the tone of her voice, and of course, he had to know what was going on. And just like that, the room shifted. The air felt heavier. My dad appeared in the doorway, eyebrows raised. Suddenly, all eyes were on me. For the first time in as long as I could remember, I was the center of attention in that house. And it was awful. I tried to brush it off, to downplay it. It's just business stuff. It's not like I have $8 million sitting in a bank account or anything. But they weren't listening. Jason's face went through a range of expressions: shock, confusion, something that looked a lot like resentment. My mom started asking questions. How long had I had that kind of money? Why hadn't I told them? Why was I living the way I was if I was rich? My dad just stood there, silent, but I could see the gears turning in his head. And then it started. The guilt, the manipulation, the reframing of my success as something I owed them, or more specifically, owed Jason. My mom's voice took on that familiar edge, the one she used when she wanted to make me feel small. "Your brother's been struggling so much, Ellie. All this time, and you're sitting on all that money? How could you not help him?" Jason didn't even try to hide his anger. "I can't believe you let me go through everything I've been through, when you could have helped. What kind of sister does that?" I stood there, stunned, my mouth opening and closing as I tried to find the words. Because how could I explain it? How could I explain that it wasn't about not wanting to help? That I'd been helping in my own quiet ways for years, chipping in for things, giving gifts I knew they couldn't afford, never making a big deal out of it. That I hadn't told them, because I knew this was exactly what would happen. I felt cornered, like I was 13 again, being scolded for not sharing my allowance with Jason, or for getting a better grade than him, and making him feel bad. I'd worked my whole life to avoid this moment, and here it was, crashing down around me on what was supposed to be a peaceful holiday. The rest of the evening was a blur of accusations and tension. My mom kept going on about how family should support each other, how Jason deserved a break after all the hard times he'd had. My dad finally spoke up, suggesting that maybe I could help Jason get out of his debts, maybe invest in one of his ideas to give him a fresh start. Jason, of course, latched onto that, suddenly full of plans and promises about how this time would be different if only I'd help him out. And me? I felt like I couldn't breathe. I'd spent my whole adult life keeping my success separate from my family because I knew it wouldn't be seen as mine. And now, in one careless moment, that boundary was shattered. I left that night with a knot in my stomach and a weight on my chest. I didn't sleep. I lay awake replaying it all, trying to figure out what to do, how to protect what I'd built, how to keep from getting pulled into the same old dynamics. I knew I couldn't go back to the way things were, but I also knew I couldn't give in. Not this time. Not after everything. That Christmas changed everything. It forced me to see my family for who they really were, and to finally see myself for who I'd become. And it was the beginning of the hardest, but most freeing, chapter of my life. I can still feel the way the room seemed to shrink around me in that moment, as if the air had been sucked out, and I was left gasping for breath. My mom's voice echoed in my ears, that mix of disbelief and accusation wrapped into 5 small words that hit me harder than I ever expected. Is this real? Do you actually have all this money? It's strange how quickly you can be transported back to childhood. In an instant, I wasn't a 37-year-old woman who had worked tirelessly to build her own business from scratch. I wasn't the woman who had sat through sleepless nights worrying about payroll, who'd fought tooth and nail for every contract and every client, who'd built something out of nothing without a safety net. No. In that moment, I was the teenager who'd been scolded for not sharing with Jason, for making him feel less than, for daring to shine in a house that only had room for 1 star. I was the girl who always felt like she was on trial in her own home. I opened my mouth, but for a few seconds, no sound came out. My heart was pounding in my chest so loud, I was sure they could hear it. My eyes darted to the screen. There it was, the spreadsheet that had exposed everything, the assets, the investments, the revenue from my company. It wasn't meant for their eyes. I hadn't hidden it exactly, but I hadn't shared it either. I'd kept it separate, safe. Until now. I've been lucky, I managed to say, my voice thin, almost a whisper. I could feel my hands trembling as I reached for the laptop, hoping that if I just closed it, maybe the moment would pass. But it was too late for that. Lucky. My mom scoffed. Ellie, this isn't luck. This is millions of dollars. How long have you had this kind of money? Why didn't you ever say anything? I tried to smile, tried to keep the mood light. It's not as dramatic as it looks. It's mostly tied up in the business. It's not like I have $8 million in cash sitting in the bank. I wanted to shrink, to disappear, to rewind time, and never open that damn file. But she wasn't listening, not really. And I could feel the shift in the room. That change in energy, subtle at first, but growing heavier with every second that passed. Jason came in, drawn by the rising tension in Mom's voice. His eyes flicked from her to me to the laptop, and I saw the curiosity turn to something darker as he tried to piece together what was going on. What's happening? He asked, his voice a little too casual, like he already knew it was about him somehow. Your sister, Mom said, turning to him with a mixture of pride and resentment that I'll never be able to forget. Your sister's been sitting on a fortune. $8 million, Jason. Can you believe that? And she never said a word to us. Jason's face twisted, confusion giving way to hurt, then anger. 8 million. He said it like a curse. Are you serious, Ellie? All this time, I've been drowning in debt, trying to get back on my feet, and you had all this? What the hell? I swallowed hard. Jason, it's not like that. I wasn't hiding it from you. I didn't think it was something I needed to share. It's my business. I worked for it. Worked for it. He laughed bitterly. So, what? You think you're better than us now? You think you're too good to help out your own family? My dad appeared in the doorway then, drawn by the noise. He looked between us, trying to figure out what he'd walked into. What's going on? He asked. Mom didn't miss a beat. Ellie's rich. She's been sitting on millions while we've been struggling. And she never said a word. Dad's face didn't change much, but I saw it. The flicker of surprise, the tightening of his jaw, the way his eyes narrowed just slightly. He was processing it, turning it over, figuring out how this new information fit into the world as he saw it. And suddenly, dinner was forgotten. The ham in the oven, the table half set, the gifts under the tree. None of it mattered. What mattered now was that I wasn't who they thought I was. Or rather, I wasn't who they needed me to be. I tried to explain. I told them about the late nights, the risks, the failures along the way. About the times I'd been terrified I wouldn't make payroll, about the loans I'd paid off, the deals that had fallen through, the years I'd lived so frugally just to keep things afloat. But it all fell on deaf ears. They didn't want the story. They didn't want to hear about the struggle. All they saw was the number, the dollar signs, the potential solution to their problems, to Jason's problems. As we sat down to dinner, if you could call it that, with tension so thick I could barely swallow a bite, the mood was electric, like a storm waiting to break. Jason wouldn't look at me. My mom kept sighing, dramatically, as if I'd somehow ruined Christmas by existing as I was. My dad kept quiet, but I could see him stealing glances at me, as if weighing his words, deciding whether to speak or let the silence do the work. Finally, Jason pushed his plate away and leaned forward. You know what would be the right thing to do, he said. His tone was calm, too calm, like he was trying to keep himself from shouting. You could help me. Help us. You could clear my debts. Get me set up. I mean, what's a few $100,000 to you now? And that was it. The moment I'd feared. The one I'd worked so hard to avoid by keeping my success private. The expectation. The entitlement. The belief that what I'd built wasn't really mine, that it was a resource for the family, for Jason, for anyone but me. I felt something harden inside me then. A part of me that had always tried to please them, to earn their approval, to be good, that part started to break away. I realized, in that moment, that nothing I'd done was ever going to be enough. Not unless it served them. Not unless it fit the story they'd written where Jason was the center of everything, and I was just the supporting character. I took a deep breath, looked around at the faces I'd known my whole life, and felt like a stranger in my own family. "I'm sorry," I said quietly, though I wasn't sure what I was apologizing for. For being successful? For not sharing? For not wanting to give away what I'd earned? "I can't do that." The silence that followed was deafening. My mom's face went cold. Jason looked like he'd been slapped. My dad finally spoke, his voice low and measured. "Ellie, it's family. Family helps family. We've always helped you." And that's when I knew, really knew, that they didn't see me at all. They saw a wallet, a safety net, a solution. But not me. That night, after the dishes were cleared and the gifts exchanged with forced smiles and stiff hugs, I drove home with tears in my eyes and a weight on my chest that felt like it might crush me. I knew things would never be the same. And maybe, just maybe, that was exactly what needed to happen. The days that followed that Christmas dinner felt like a slow-motion train wreck I couldn't stop. I remember waking up the next morning with this strange hope that maybe they'd calm down, that maybe the shock would wear off, that maybe, just maybe, we could move past it.
I kept telling myself that.
I tried to convince myself that this would all blow over, that my family wouldn't really expect me to fix Jason's life just because I'd managed to build my own. But deep down, I think I knew better. I think a part of me had known from the moment my mom pointed at that laptop screen that everything had changed. It started with the small comments. Little jabs slipped into conversation over breakfast, as if they weren't really meant to hurt, but I felt every one of them like a pinprick. My mom, stirring her coffee, sighing, saying things like, "It's just such a shame. All that money sitting there when Jason could really use a break." My dad chiming in while reading the paper, muttering about how hard life can be for some people and how lucky others are. Jason didn't bother with subtlety. He sat across from me at the table, arms folded, his face hard. He looked at me like I'd personally betrayed him. "You could wipe out my debt with a check," he said one morning, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. "You wouldn't even miss it, Ellie. You wouldn't have to change a thing about your life. Think about what that would mean for me, for Mom and Dad, for all of us." I tried to respond. I really did. I tried to explain calmly at first that the money wasn't just sitting there, that most of it was invested or tied up in the business. I told him that what I had wasn't some magical bottomless pit of wealth, that it took hard work and smart decisions to keep things going. But none of it mattered. They didn't want explanations. They wanted results.
They wanted me to say yes.
Mom was the worst with the guilt trips. She started reminiscing about Jason's childhood, as if reminding me of all the times he'd been hurt or disappointed would somehow convince me that I owed him now. "He's had such a hard time of it," she'd say, her voice soft and sad, like she was narrating some tragic story. "Remember how much he struggled in school? Remember how devastated he was when he didn't make that college baseball team? And then that awful breakup and losing that job. Oh, Ellie, he's been through so much. Don't you think he deserves a little help, just this once?" Every conversation became about Jason's needs. Every family gathering, every phone call, every text. My success wasn't mine anymore. It was theirs, or at least that's how they saw it. They acted like I was hoarding some great treasure that rightly belonged to all of us. And Jason didn't even try to hide his entitlement. He started texting me daily, sending me links to apartments he wanted to rent, cars he wanted to buy, vacations he dreamed of taking, always followed by some version of, "You could make this happen. Why won't you?" I started dreading my phone. I stopped checking my messages because every time I did, it was just another reminder that in their eyes, I wasn't their daughter or their sister anymore. I was a bank account, a solution, a missed opportunity that they were desperate to correct. The worst part? They made me doubt myself. I'd lie awake at night, replaying their words, wondering if they were right. Was I selfish? Was I heartless for not wanting to help? After all, wasn't this what family was supposed to do, support each other? But then I'd remember all the times I'd been the afterthought. All the times I'd sat through dinners where no one asked about my life. All the milestones that had gone unnoticed while Jason's smallest victories were celebrated like he'd conquered the world. And I'd remember how I'd worked for every dollar I had. The sacrifices I'd made. The years I'd gone without so that I could build something that would last. I wanted so badly to make them see it, to make them understand. One night, after yet another round of guilt-laced calls, I sat down and wrote an email. I poured my heart into it. I told them about the late nights and the early mornings, about the fear of failure that had kept me up, the stress that had made me sick at times. I told them about the deals I'd lost, the clients who'd walked away, the times I'd almost given up. I reminded them that I hadn't had help, that I'd done it on my own. I asked them to please respect that. I sent it and waited, hoping it might change something. But when the reply came, it was clear they hadn't heard me at all. My mom wrote back, and all she said was, "We're so proud of everything you've done, Ellie. But don't you think it's time to give back to the people who've always been there for you? That was the breaking point for me. Because the truth was, they hadn't always been there for me. Not really. They'd been there for Jason. They'd been there to remind me of my place, to make sure I didn't outshine him, to keep me in the background where I belonged. And now that I'd stepped out of that shadow, now that I'd built something for myself, they wanted to pull me back in, not because they cared about me, but because they saw a way to make my success serve their needs. Jason started showing up at my place unannounced after that. First it was casual, just stopping by, he said, to talk. But it always came back to the same thing. The money.
The debt.
His plans, his dreams. And always the reminder that I could make it all happen for him, if I'd just say yes. I started feeling trapped. My own home didn't feel safe anymore. Every knock at the door made my stomach twist. Every call, every message felt like another demand, another reminder that they didn't see me, they saw what I could give them. I tried setting boundaries. I told them I needed space, that I couldn't keep having the same conversation over and over. But they didn't respect that. They pushed harder. The guilt trips became sharper, the demands more aggressive. Jason even started bringing up the times I'd needed help growing up, the time Dad co-signed my first apartment lease, the time Mom lent me money for textbooks. We were there for you, he said. Now it's your turn. But those weren't gifts, they were normal things parents do for their kids. And I'd paid them back, every cent.
But they didn't care about that.
They didn't want repayment. They wanted more. They wanted what I'd built, what I'd earned. And no explanation, no reasoning, no appeal to fairness or logic was going to change that. I felt myself pulling away, emotionally and physically. I stopped visiting as often. I let calls go to voicemail. I stopped replying to texts right away. I needed time to think, to breathe, to figure out how to move forward. Because deep down, I knew this wasn't about a one-time favor. It wasn't about helping Jason get back on his feet. This was about control, about making sure that no matter how far I'd come, I stayed in my place. And I wasn't sure I could live like that anymore. The demands didn't stop. If anything, they got worse. But something inside me was starting to change. I was tired of feeling guilty for what I'd earned. Tired of being the invisible daughter who was only seen when it suited them. And tired of carrying the weight of their expectations on my shoulders.
I didn't know what the next step would be yet.
But I knew this. I couldn't keep letting them define what I owed, who I was, or what my success meant. That was mine. And for the first time, I was ready to protect it. What was supposed to be a holiday dinner, a warm, familiar gathering with laughter and food and maybe, just maybe, some sense of family, turned into something I still struggle to describe. Was it an intervention? A shakedown? An ambush? All I know is that it was the night everything broke, and I realized I could never go back to seeing them the way I had before. That night, the illusion shattered, and I saw the truth in all its painful clarity. It started out so deceptively normal. The house smelled like roast turkey and cinnamon the same way it always did. The dining table was set with the same faded tablecloth we'd had for years, the same mismatched plates. If you just glanced in from the outside, it probably would have looked like any other Christmas dinner. But I felt the tension the second I walked into the room. It hung in the air like smoke, thick and choking, even though no one had said a word yet. I should have turned around. I should have walked out. But I didn't. I sat down, trying to convince myself that I was imagining it. The meal started out with small talk, strained, awkward small talk. My mom asked how business was going, her tone too sweet, too forced, as if she was trying to bait me into bringing up the money myself. My dad kept glancing at me over the rim of his wine glass, his expression unreadable, but his jaw tight in that way I recognized from my childhood, when he was holding something back, waiting for the right moment to let it out. Jason barely spoke at all at first. He just watched, his arms folded, his eyes on me like he was waiting for me to slip up, to say the wrong thing, to give him his opening. And then, about halfway through the meal, they pounced. It started with my mom. She put down her fork, folded her hands, and looked at me with this expression that I think she thought was kind, but it felt cold. Calculated. Ellie, she said, her voice soft but firm, we need to talk about something important. Something that affects all of us. I felt my stomach sink. I knew exactly where this was going, but I tried, to keep calm. Okay, I said, setting down my glass of water. What is it? And that's when it all came out. The disappointment, the resentment, the demands, dressed up in the language of family concern. My mom talked about how worried she was for Jason, how hard life had been for him, how he just needed a little help to get back on track. My dad chimed in, saying he was so disappointed that I hadn't already offered, that I was sitting on all this money while my brother struggled. Jason didn't even bother to pretend. He laid it out, plain as day. He wanted me to pay off his debts. He wanted a fresh start. And in his mind, I owed him that. Every time I tried to speak, they cut me off. I tried to explain that I'd worked for what I had, that I wasn't sitting on piles of cash, that my money wasn't some magic solution to every problem. I tried to remind them that I'd helped in other ways, that I'd always been there when they needed me, even when they didn't notice, even when they didn't care. But none of it mattered. They didn't want to hear it. They didn't want explanations. They wanted what they thought was theirs. My mom said she couldn't believe I'd be so selfish after everything the family had done for me. My dad shook his head, his face hard, and said he was disappointed in me, like I was a child who'd misbehaved. Jason didn't even bother with guilt. He just sat back, arms folded, waiting for me to break, waiting for me to cave and say, "Okay, fine, I'll write the check." But I didn't. I didn't because something in me snapped that night. It wasn't anger at first, not really. It was clarity. For the first time, I saw them as they were, not the family I'd spent my whole life trying to win over, trying to please, trying to be good enough for, but people who saw me as a wallet, a resource, a means to an end. And that realization hurt more than I can describe. It felt like the floor had fallen out from under me. Like everything I thought I knew, everything I thought we were had been a lie. I sat there, looking at them. My mother with her pleading eyes, my father with his quiet judgment, my brother with his entitled smirk, and I felt this wave of sadness wash over me. Sadness for the family I thought I had, the family I'd always wanted us to be, and sadness for myself, for all the years I'd wasted trying to earn their love with success, with kindness, with loyalty. None of it had mattered, because in the end, it wasn't about me. It was about what I could give them. I don't remember much of the rest of the dinner. I remember pushing food around on my plate, unable to eat. I remember trying one last time to make them see me, to make them understand that what they were asking wasn't fair, wasn't right. But they didn't want to understand. They wanted compliance. They wanted my money. And when it became clear I wasn't going to give it, the mood turned cold. The warmth of the holiday was gone. The laughter, the memories, the sense of belonging. All of it vanished in that moment. I went to bed that night feeling hollow. I lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, listening to the quiet of the house that no longer felt like home. And I thought about everything. About the girl I'd been, always trying to be enough. About the woman I'd become, strong and successful in spite of them, not because of them. And I realized that this wasn't just about Jason's debts. This was about control, about keeping me small, about making sure I never forgot my place. But I had forgotten my place. Or maybe I'd finally outgrown it. And as painful as that night was, as heartbreaking as it felt to see my family's true colors, it was also freeing. Because once you see the truth, you can't unsee it. And once you know where you stand, you can choose to stand somewhere else. The breaking point wasn't a single moment, a single word, a single demand. It was the culmination of a lifetime of being overlooked, underestimated, and used. It was the night I finally stopped trying to earn what they were never going to give me. The night I decided that my worth wasn't tied to what I could provide, what I could sacrifice, what I could give away. That Christmas was supposed to be about family, about togetherness, about love. Instead, it became the night I chose myself. And as hard as it was, as lonely as it felt in that moment, I knew it was the right choice. Because for the first time in my life, I saw things clearly. And I knew I deserved better. I left that night. It was as sudden and as certain as that. I didn't plan it. I hadn't walked into my parents' house thinking this would be the last time I'd sit at their table, the last time I'd pretend we were a family in the way I always wished we were. But when I stood up from that table, heart pounding, cheeks burning with the sting of their words and accusations, I knew I couldn't stay. I couldn't sit there and let them chip away at me any longer. I remember the silence as I gathered my things. The clink of my glass when I accidentally bumped it while reaching for my coat. The scrape of the chair as I pushed it back under the table. I remember Jason's smug, expectant expression shift into something like confusion, maybe even fear, as he realized I wasn't going to play my part. My mother's eyes filled with a strange mix of anger and sadness, and my father's jaw tightened as though he was holding back one final disappointment to hurl my way. But they said nothing. Not at first. I think they were too stunned to see me actually walk away. I slipped my arms into my coat, my fingers trembling as I buttoned it up. My heart raced, so fast it felt like it would break out of my chest. My head was spinning. I felt like I was floating above the room, watching myself from some far-off place. Was I really doing this? Was I really leaving? Yes. Yes, I was. Because if I stayed, I'd be agreeing to their version of me. The version that existed only to give, to sacrifice, to fix what wasn't mine to fix. And I was done with that. I had to be. I picked up my overnight bag, slung it over my shoulder, and turned to face them one last time. I didn't have a speech planned. God, I wish I'd had something powerful to say, something that would have stuck with them, haunted them, made them rethink everything. But all I could manage, through the lump in my throat and the tears threatening to spill, was, goodbye. And then I walked out. I stepped out into the cold night, the air sharp against my face, my breath coming out in shaky clouds. I got into my car, hands gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles went white, and just sat there for a moment, staring at the house where I'd grown up. The windows glowed warmly from the lights inside, but that house didn't feel like home anymore. Maybe it never really had. I started the engine and pulled away, the tires crunching over the driveway's thin layer of frost. The road stretched out ahead of me, dark and empty, and I drove into it without looking back. The tears came then, hot and fast, blurring my vision, spilling down my cheeks. I cried for what felt like hours. I cried for the girl I'd been, for the woman I'd become, for the family I'd always wanted but never really had. I cried for all the wasted years, all the love I'd tried to earn, all the times I'd bitten my tongue or swallowed my pride or given more than I could afford, just to be seen. But underneath the heartbreak, there was something else, something unexpected. Relief. A quiet, fragile sense of peace that grew with every mile I put between myself and that house. It wasn't just the house I was leaving behind, it was the guilt, the obligation, the endless, exhausting need to prove myself. I realized, somewhere along that dark highway, that I didn't owe them anything. Not my money,
Not my time.
not my peace of mind. They weren't entitled to the life I'd built, to the success I'd fought so hard for. They weren't entitled to my sacrifices. They weren't entitled to me. And for the first time, I truly believed that. The drive home felt both endless and far too short. My condo welcomed me with its quiet, familiar comfort. The place I'd made my own, the place that reflected who I really was. I set down my bag, kicked off my shoes, and stood in the middle of my living room just breathing. The silence felt good. It felt safe. I didn't have to explain myself here. I didn't have to defend my choices or justify my success or listen to anyone tell me who I should be. I curled up on the couch that night, wrapped in a blanket, sipping tea I barely tasted, and let the weight of it all settle over me. The sadness didn't disappear. It didn't vanish just because I'd left. But it felt different now. It felt honest. And with the sadness came strength, a quiet, steady kind of strength that told me I'd done the right thing. That walking away wasn't weakness. It was courage. In the days that followed, I replayed that night over and over in my head, wondering if there was anything I could have said or done differently. But the truth is, it wouldn't have mattered. Because this was never really about the money. It was about control, about keeping me in a role that suited them. And I was done playing that part. I thought they might call, might try to reach out, might try to patch things up in their own way. But they didn't. Not at first. And I didn't chase after them. I didn't apologize. I didn't send explanations or justifications or pleas for understanding. I let the silence speak. And in that silence, I found myself again. I remembered who I was beneath all the layers of obligation and guilt and family expectation. I was someone who'd worked hard, who'd built something meaningful, who'd earned every bit of what I had. And I didn't owe it to anyone. I spent a lot of time reflecting in those first weeks. I took long walks, journaled late into the night, sat with my thoughts even when they were uncomfortable. I let myself grieve, not just for the family I'd left behind, but for the hope I'd carried all these years that things might be different someday. That if I just tried hard enough, gave enough, was enough, they'd finally see me. But they didn't. And maybe they never would. And that was okay. Because I saw me. I saw my worth. And I wasn't going to let anyone diminish that again. Walking away that night was the hardest thing I've ever done. But it was also the most liberating. I chose myself. I chose peace. And for the first time in my life, that was enough. And as I sit here now, sharing this with you, I hope that if you've ever felt trapped by the weight of others' expectations, if you've ever been made to feel like you owe pieces of yourself to people who don't appreciate them, you'll remember this. You don't. You don't owe them your happiness, your success, your peace of mind. You have the right to choose yourself. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away. Since that night, everything changed. The moment I walked away from my parents' house, from the table where they tried to shame me into submission, from the family I'd spent my whole life trying to please, I began to live for myself. And I didn't even realize how heavy the weight had been until I finally set it down. That first drive home, as the dark highway stretched out before me, I felt a kind of quiet I hadn't known in years. Not just silence in my ears, but silence inside my heart. No more racing thoughts about how to make them proud. No more rehearsing apologies for choices I had every right to make. No more guilt for being who I was. The first morning I woke up in my condo, I felt it again, that stillness, that peace. The sunlight streamed through the windows, casting a warm glow over the space I had built for myself, piece by piece, over the years. My home wasn't extravagant. It wasn't designed to impress anyone. But it was mine. Every book on the shelf, every plant in the corner, every picture on the wall was chosen by me, for me. And for the first time, I let myself enjoy it without wondering what my mother would criticize or what Jason would mock. I spent those early days after Christmas doing things I hadn't allowed myself to do in years. I slept in. I took long walks through the park without rushing back to check my phone or answer emails I didn't want to answer. I treated myself to coffee at the little cafe on the corner, sat by the window, and watched the world go by. I didn't think about my family. I didn't think about the money. I didn't think about what I owed or who I should be or how to fix things that weren't mine to fix. I just let myself be. And it was hard, at first. Harder than I expected. Because even as I felt at peace, the old voices crept in. My mother's voice telling me I was selfish. My father's voice saying he was disappointed. Jason's voice demanding, expecting, assuming. I would hear them in my head when I least expected it, while I was brushing my teeth, or reading a book, or cooking dinner. And I'd feel the old, familiar urge to call, to explain, to smooth things over. But I didn't. I sat with the discomfort. I let the voices come and go. And slowly, they began to fade. My business became my sanctuary. I poured my energy into it, not because I had anything to prove, but because it brought me joy. I loved what I did, building brands, helping clients tell their stories, watching ideas come to life. I didn't have to justify my success anymore. I didn't have to downplay it or hide it or make myself small so others could feel big. I let myself be proud of what I'd built. I let myself celebrate my wins, no matter how small. I stopped waiting for my parents' approval. I stopped needing it. Since that night, everything changed. The moment I walked away from my parents' house, from the table where they tried to shame me into submission, from the family I'd spent my whole life trying to please, I began to live for myself. And I didn't even realize how heavy the weight had been until I finally set it down. That first drive home, as the dark highway stretched out before me, I felt a kind of quiet I hadn't known in years. Not just silence in my ears, but silence inside my heart. No more racing thoughts about how to make them proud. No more rehearsing apologies for choices I had every right to make. No more guilt for being who I was. The first morning I woke up in my condo, I felt it again. That stillness, that peace. The sunlight streamed through the windows, casting a warm glow over the space I had built for myself, piece by piece, over the years. My home wasn't extravagant. It wasn't designed to impress anyone. But it was mine. Every book on the shelf, every plant in the corner, every picture on the wall was chosen by me, for me. And for the first time, I let myself enjoy it without wondering what my mother would criticize or what Jason would mock. I spent those early days after Christmas doing things I hadn't allowed myself to do in years. I slept in. I took long walks through the park without rushing back to check my phone or answer emails I didn't want to answer. I treated myself to coffee at the little cafe on the corner, sat by the window, and watched the world go by. I didn't think about my family. I didn't think about the money. I didn't think about what I owed or who I should be or how to fix things that weren't mine to fix. I just let myself be. And it was hard, at first. Harder than I expected. Because even as I felt that peace, the old voices crept in. My mother's voice telling me I was selfish. My father's voice saying he was disappointed. Jason's voice demanding, expecting, assuming. I would hear them in my head when I least expected it, while I was brushing my teeth, or reading a book, or cooking dinner. And I'd feel the old, familiar urge to call, to explain, to smooth things over. But I didn't. I sat with the discomfort. I let the voices come and go. And slowly, they began to fade. My business became my sanctuary. I poured my energy into it, not because I had anything to prove, but because it brought me joy. I loved what I did, building brands, helping clients tell their stories, watching ideas come to life. I didn't have to justify my success anymore. I didn't have to downplay it or hide it or make myself small so others could feel big. I let myself be proud of what I'd built. I let myself celebrate my wins, no matter how small. I stopped waiting for my parents' approval. I stopped needing it. Clients noticed the change in me. Friends noticed too. There was a lightness in me that hadn't been there before. I laughed more easily. I said yes to things I used to turn down because I was too busy trying to juggle everyone else's expectations. I reconnected with old friends, made new ones, opened myself up to experiences I'd been too exhausted to enjoy before. I traveled, nothing fancy, just little trips to places I'd always wanted to see. I stood at the edge of the ocean and let the waves wash over my feet, and I felt free, truly free. The calls from my family came, eventually. First, a voicemail from my mother, her voice tight with hurt and anger. "I don't understand how you can just abandon us," she said. "After everything we've done for you." I listened to it once, then deleted it. A few days later, a text from Jason, short and bitter. "Hope your money keeps you warm." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. I knew that anything I said would only pull me back into the cycle I'd worked so hard to break.